content areas, their discipline, and literacy all are. And so we are really excited to have Wanda and Anna helping us to do that today. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to the two of them and allow them to share themselves and introduce themselves and then get on with the webinar.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Morrison. That was wonderful. My name is Anna Stewart. I'm a classroom teacher. I teach 8th grade science right now in Lexington. And I'll be sharing first, and then Dr. Littlejohn will share what her perspective in a high school looks like. But before we get started, Dr. Littlejohn, do you want to introduce yourself?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Wanda Littlejohn. I am an instructional specialist at Carolina High School in Greenville. I work with all of the teachers, all content areas, but my first love was chemistry and 9th grade science. And so a lot of the perspective that I have is going to come from the instructional coach lens, and what I would do with my teachers to help them incorporate writing into their classroom.
Awesome. Okay, let's get started. So before we really get into the nitty gritty, Dr. Morrison really challenged me last week, 2 weeks ago, to indulge in like, well, why did you pick the word curiosity when so often in science, oh my gosh, all we hear is inquiry and inquiry and inquiry and inquiry. And so through a little reflecting, to me, using curiosity instead of saying inquiry seems so much more natural. And that's really where we want to be with our, at least certainly our middle school students. Inquiry, from my perspective, is more of a process, whereas curiosity is a natural desire that we need to tap into for these students. And that is what needs to guide a lot of what we do and why we do. And it's going to help these kids really seek out their own knowledge. And then we'll come in with some inquiry where they seek and ask and gain more knowledge through a more traditional classroom setting. So curiosity, because it's natural and it's childlike, what Dr. Morrison and I talked about. So curiosity to write in science. Some things that we are going to be discussing is how can we help students move beyond just generalized writing towards specialized science writing practices with some strategies so that we can improve their scientific writing. And how can writing and reading, because we can't separate the two, how can those be used as tools to enhance the guiding or the gaining of science knowledge and inquiry skills? And so this is much more than note taking. This is much more than let's write a lab report. Let's write a paper. So the goal is that we're actually providing them more various opportunities that look different in science than what they normally would think of in science class. I hate that I can't see y'all and I'm just sharing my screen. Before the main stuff, I wanted to share this because very rarely do science teachers get support in the area of literacy. Very rarely do a lot of science teachers understand, my gosh, well, why is this so important? Why do they keep telling us disciplinary literacies? And I think as a science teacher, we really need to understand that this stuff helps our students make sense of the world that they live in. This basic literacy, intermediate, disciplinary, this is what they use to learn about what's going on in today's world there's so much information, so easily obtainable, but not all of it is true. And us taking time to really understand why specialized literacies and why disciplinary literacies are so important, this is the bulk of it. That we want them to be critical thinkers. We want them to be problem solvers. We want them to be able to test their hypothesis. Like this is where it starts. And that's why this is all so important. And so just a quick, we've all seen this before, but it really irks me sometimes when our science teachers, like they just don't, they may say they don't, it seems like they don't care, but I just don't feel like they're supported in the way that all teachers should be, because we're all literacy teachers in our own sense. So Wanda, can you share the Padlet link just in case we have some people who can't access this QR code? So I'm going to ask that you access this Padlet. This is something that I use in my class, and I'm going to switch over my screen really quick. Da-na-na-na-na. We're going to interact with each other. Okay. So Wanda, can you let me know? Are we good? Not yet? You tell me.
Good. We're good. The Padlet link is in the chat.
This Padlet link is in the chat. Okay. Can people give Wanda like a thumbs up? And then Wanda's going to let me know when I can start talking about the Padlet.
They say they're clicking on the link and cannot open it, but some people have it. So
could you put the QR code up again? I'll try it that way. The links are so tiny on my.
Absolutely. Hold on. Let me unshare my screen. Share my screen again. Boom. Boom. Uh-oh. We have a fussy toddler in the back. Okay.
You might be getting messages. Some people were trying to get in and the link isn't working, so I'm adding them directly in from the calendar invite.
Do it.
Thank you, because I'm not familiar. I don't usually use Microsoft, and there's a little bar that's obscuring part of the QR code.
Once I just copied and pasted the link in, and that worked lickety split. So
Lickety split. All right, so I'm going to go back to the Padlet then. And if we're still having some issues, that counts. All right, so like I said, this is something that I use in my classroom really diagnostically. So when we think about writing in science, I just want to see where we are. You've got 3 different columns that I would like you to add to. So when you think about writing in science, what are some vocabulary terms that you might be thinking of? Evidence, hypothesis. What are some types of writings that you might think, or even like what you did growing up in your classes when you think back to your sciences, when you think about, well, how did I write in my science classes? I want to know that. And then maybe some text that you might engage with, whether that be reading passages, articles. What would that content kind of be like? Or just what do you read in science? So let's do like 2 or 3 minutes and see what some people come up with, and let's talk through some of that.
Types of writing, we always had to write up our lab reports.
Lab reports. Ooh.
So I have to ask, when you do this, students are talking out loud to you, or they're clicking and entering the words themselves?
Yes, ma'am. They're clicking and entering themselves. We're
okay.
not talking yet. There are some ways in the Padlet where if they have their own account, you'll be able to like see their names. And so sometimes that can be like a participation grade, like, oh, you did this, great, check. So you can use it as, an informal, formative really, this is what like gets our conversation starting
Oh.
sometimes.
What is the program? I've never seen it.
It's called Padlet. And they
Padlet.
don't- yes, ma'am. And they don't all have to look like this. There's different like styles that you can use. This just made the most sense. Crystallization. Oh my goodness. Theory, process, variables. Ugh. Yes. Reports.
Oh,
findings.
somebody said thesis. No, thesis.
Yep. Diagrams. Yes. And that's so important. I've got some children who aren't doing too well reading their diagrams. Yes. Right. So clearly, they're just like all of our contents. There's specialized vocabulary, there's specialized writing. It is not generalized any longer. I off to the side, I wanted you to see these are some resources that I've made, and they'll be in the slideshow. So if you would like anything, you can come back here and save and download from the resource sides. Reading math problems. Ooh, yes. Who put that? I love that. I love that so much. Okay. Let's move on. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing the Padlet. I'm going to go back to the slides. Okay. Okay, I'm going to ask you guys to do another little thing so that we can participate and talk to each other. All right. Before we go over this slide, I want us to take like 3-ish minutes. Let's read it. What jumps out at you? What do you think of when you read some of these bullet points? Are they things that maybe you would do in your classroom, or do you have any thoughts, any questions? So let's take like 3-ish minutes and then we'll just kind of snowball and share.
Anna, we're not able to see the last part of the last bullet. There's like a black bar that kind of comes across it. So I don't know if you can just, are you able to make it a little bit smaller print or to shift it a little bit?
Ooh, let's see.
I
Or
think
that-
it's because the strip with all of our faces is down there. So it's
Exactly. And Teams
Oh,
doesn't allow
I
you to
don't
move
see
it.
that. I just see it on my screen. Like I don't even see y'all's faces. So if you're all making fun of me, I will not know.
If you could maybe just read the last bullet point then.
Okay. Scientific writing has the following characteristics: precise vocabulary, verbs, observations that are written in bullet points or phrases, questions that are turned into complete thoughts, illustrations, data, communication of ideas.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Since that was the last bullet point, does anyone have anything that kind of like jumped out, or just a little wonder, or I like that?
Well, I do, because I'm a reading background person, that there's no reading in this initial thing, like to that there's not like an outlandish paragraph that or something that you could put in there on the topic. So I'm curious, have you ever gotten started with just a quick read?
In my science classroom?
Mm-hmm.
No, ma'am.
Okay. I just
That-
wondered.
Typically how no, ma'am. We don't.
I can't see anyone anymore, so I have no idea if I'm speaking out of turn, but I really appreciate, I'm also a literacy person and I'm a teacher educator, so I'm not actually in a classroom, but I'm supervising teacher candidates who are going to be supporting 5th grade bilingual kids with inquiry in the context of a literacy, with science inquiry in the context of a literacy clinical. Anyway, blah, blah. But what I love is that one that says writing can be expanded to include student created visual representations. That one, that is
Mhm.
awesome.
Right. Their drawings say just as much as their words can. 100%. Tori
So
said, I like,
Tori said in the chat, I like the idea of communicating learning in a variety of ways. I feel like that helps students struggling with topics still communicating understanding.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And
Sorry.
I like the word curiosity because it gives them some ownership in what they're going to learn. You know, they are then motivated to find out the answers to their curiosity. You know, in the same way as inquiry, but just I like the word curiosity for it.
Yes, I love that. I love that you pointed that out. Because that's exactly what we're going to move into right after this. So as science teachers, we need to rest and sit in the fact that everything isn't, like we said, notes. Everything isn't paper. It can be these illustrations, and it doesn't have to be, your stereotypical sit and get. But literacy should always ideally start with some type of curiosity driven from the students. So we need to find out what they're interested in, and then go and then move from there. And so I'm going to show you guys some things that we do in my class. That is a real tangible way to see this really lived out. So we start every unit with, well, first off, okay, I got ahead of myself. Sorry, guys. So the 1, 2, 3, the fourth bullet point, our students' writing should be able to communicate their learning. So this slide is all about communicating in scientific ways. So when we start talking about communicating and talking like scientists, a lot of my students at least don't know what that looks like, and what could that be. So these posters are in my classroom, and this really helps guide them. Well, what do you mean, how do you communicate in scientific ways? And these are also in my resources from the Padlet. And so when students are having to explain, whether it's in a scientist circle, whether it's in their writing, and they get stuck, like, well, hold on, how do I give evidence to support my claim? Well, here we go. Let's look over to our resource. And so these are really great things for them to get their feet wet with, to learn how to talk like scientists in classrooms. But going back to the curiosity thing. So this slide, every unit we start just a blank slate. What do y'all want to know? So this unit was astronomy, clearly. These are 2 classes. And we take like a good 20 minutes, and I sit and I'm just typing away. And if they don't want to share out loud, then they share it on a Post-it note, or they just share it in some other format that they feel comfortable in. And so I put all of their questions on a poster, and I spend way too long making it cute, because that's what I care about. And then these questions are posted in our classroom for the entire unit. And we go back to it almost daily. And we use these questions to drive a lot of our lessons, because this is what they care about and this is what they want to learn about. And yes, like, you make sure that it's still hitting the topics and the standards and all of the things, but they don't know that. They don't know that you're driving it. Now, are some of these questions testable? Absolutely not. Are some of these questions even like normal? Probably not. But if you can glance at any of these, this is what 8th graders come up with. And it is always so just heartwarming to see that, like, they do like school. Like, they do want to learn. And that's why I love science, because I think science is the coolest class. Um,
Anna, we've lost your share.
what are you looking at?
You.
You.
Yay. Well, that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing to look at. All right. What about now?
Good. We're
Yes.
good now.
But
Okay,
I loved your earrings.
Mud pie, girlfriend, Amazon. How long have I been talking and y'all haven't been able to see these posters?
Just for a minute. You're good.
Okay. All right. So, what is so important when students do this, they're generating their own questions, they're reflecting, and this in itself, them formulating their own questions, is a form of science, is a form of science literacy. So we use this curiosity and then we back it up with inquiry. So natural, very honest curiosity that comes from the students. And then we use these to create what we use in my class called CERs. So a CER is a claim evidence reasoning. So this is a whole framework, strategy, call it what you want it, but it has to always start out with a question. So a question like, we can use one from, why is the sky blue? So first question in class 7, why is the sky blue? So that's what you would pose first. And then students would say, well, what's your claim? What do you think? So claim is going to be the answer to the question. And then we've got to get some evidence. So students need to be able to analyze the data that they collect. So you're going to have some lessons on like, how do we analyze data? What does evidence look like? When we do these, we start very slow. We usually start out with something that's not science related. But they're already doing these things. They're already doing CERs in their other classes. They're already doing CERs in their real life. They are arguing all of the time about which TikTok star is better than this TikTok star and da 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 da. So they're already they know how to do this. They just need our help and our support turning it into a science thing. So I'm going to show you guys some examples of some CERs that we do in my class and just the growth that my students have had. And the dots really do start to connect. And they really do start understanding that they can have very academic, argument-based conversations while using these. And something that, and I told Dr. Morrison I was going to do this to her, something Dr. Morrison had pulled up or had brought up when we were talking about this was how great it is that when you get to that evidence piece, that's when that critical literacy lens can come in, that y'all know so well. And we can just take it a whole different way. Like, Dr. Morrison, what did you say? Like, who's missing from this evidence was something that really like stuck with me. But yeah, anyways, let's move on and let's see what my little babies get to do. All right, here are some examples. So first unit was physics. And the problem was, does increasing speed or increasing mass affect kinetic energy more? And Sweet Baby said, it depends, which in science is not really a bad answer. Does she need some improvement? 100%, but it's not a terrible place to start. So with these kinds of answers, we would kind of weed it out in a scientist circle before we get back to writing a more scientific claim. We would weed it out and like, okay, well, what do you mean it depends? Because yeah, science isn't linear. Science isn't fluid. Science, the way we think and claims that we make can change based on our evidence that we gather, based on our data that we gather. But, oh, hello, mister. No, you need to leave. sorry, everyone. The 2-year-old has entered the room. So another thing about CERs in South Carolina, we have just adopted new science standards, and these CERs go so well with the new next gen standards. No, sir. No, baby. No, you got to go. The other example that I have over here is a more scaffolded CER. So if you have students who need more support, there certainly is room for that. This CER is all about light. So Kendall was able to use so much more vocabulary in this one. Oh my goodness, y'all, where's your dad? All right, y'all. This is it. This is real life. This is mom. This is mom stuff. Let me mute so I can go yell at my husband, everyone. Hold on.
I was gonna say, Wanda, you can jump in, but we can't skip to your slides.
No. All right. So, and I wanted to just highlight the way she was able, in her reasoning, able to use more vocabulary than she was previously in her evidence. So her claim was, so the question was, why do we see a red moon during a lunar eclipse? Which, if we did go back to our driving board questions, you would have seen so many questions about, well, what's a blood moon? What's a harvest moon? Why is the moon red sometimes? So this aligns with a lot of those questions. So she gave her claim. We were able to gather our evidence. So you do your claim and then an investigation, an experiment, a lab, whatever. You come back and they gather their evidence. And down here, you can see that she did even a diagram. And then her reasoning, she was able to really talk like a scientist. She can communicate her learning through scientific language. And that's the goal here. The goal is that they are able to put it all together and to communicate through their science with scientific language. And then my last example, because I know I've been talking very long, Tyler, he's going to run the world one day, I swear. This CER is, why do we have seasons? And CERs can weed out misconceptions so wonderfully, which is another reason that I love using these in my classroom, because so many times kids think, oh, well, we have seasons because we're just closer to the sun in the summer. We're just closer. And I'm like, no, we're not. So he's got his claim, he's gathered his evidence, and his evidence is really close to his reasonings. His evidence he's given me different types of evidence. So he's said that the earth is tilted towards the sun, but then he's also pulled in solstices and equinoxes and amount of daylight. And he's given me a diagram. And then over here, he's able to put it all together. He talks like a scientist. He is effectively working through what his claim was, using the evidence to back up, well, this is why I think what I think. And well, here's the evidence. And we can't, what do you want? It's so hard to argue when students write like this. Like, he 100% knocked it out of the park. So these are some examples of CERs and how I use them in my classroom. But why does it matter? Another thing that Dr. Morrison really pressed into me, like, why CERs? Why did you choose those? So CERs develop critical thinking. Students can develop critical thinking skills, the process. They can gain insight to the scientific process, because I think so often our students think, oh, well, here's the problem, here's the hypothesis, here's this and this, this and this. And really, we can go back to everything. It's not one straight path. The scientific process is just very fluid. I think one of the most important things is that they can communicate using scientific language, and they engage in arguments is really what I care about a ton in my class. And using these CERs has given them more confidence, I think, when engaging in arguments, whether it be about science, or really anything else, because they're, like I said, they're doing these types of things in their English class about Romeo and Juliet, Homer, in social studies. They're already collecting evidence and using their evidence to support their claim. But in science, it can look a little different. And giving them the confidence that they can write in science, they can do this, is important to me, that they get to also use what they care about. So starting with that curiosity, and developing them as science readers and writers to send them on to Wanda, to send them on to the high school. So I'm going to turn it over to Wanda. We're going to talk about high school for the next 30-ish, 20, 30-ish minutes whenever Wanda's ready.
Can I ask a quick question?
Ask me a quick question.
How many days, like this is a 3-day lesson plan or a 5-day, or, to get from the start to the finish of this, how many days of class would it usually take?
So, well, our astronomy unit takes like 3 months.
Oh, okay.
And so
But
with
this little portion.
Well, those were different. So those CERs, so like, this is all about the seasons. So like I probably do like 2 weeks of like seasons and eclipses. So we will do multiple CERs within like one objective or like a standard. So I can't like tell you it is.
Well, and do some students do a different question if because you had so many questions on that list for the whole unit? So you can assign like individualized questions also.
Right, you can assign
Oh, that's so cool.
individualized questions, and like as we go through the unit and we hit a question, and it might not even have been an intentional, like, oh my gosh, wait, we just had a random discussion about this, because then it segued from here to here, and then you asked this question. So we'll go throughout the unit and we'll mark off those questions.
Good.
Like all right, we answered your question, Terry. Move on. Great. Oh my gosh, Evan, we answered your question. Did you have any other did you have any secondary questions about this? So they
It
really
just sounds so effective.
And I think they appreciate that we use what they care about and what they want to know. And all of those questions are in the standards. Like you are still teaching the standards by doing that. It just takes a little bit of time.
And I wanted to add something in there that Anna and I had talked about the seasons, was we talked about you can put that critical spin on it, because there's these seasons that we experience in North America, but then to actually turn that around and to think about the idea that that is a very, that's our centered lived experience, but then to say, well, how do other people experience seasons? How does somebody in Australia experience seasons in a different way, and that you can take these ideas and extend them into that critical literacy, that critical approach to understanding that not everybody's understanding of even something that seems like scientific fact is interpretive depending upon where you are and what your context is.
Right. And I love that you said that. And it gives opportunities, I think, for other students. So if you have students who've like grown up in Europe, I didn't know this, but I have some students from Germany right now. They don't start seasons based on solstices and equinoxes. They just start it based on the month. So like when it hits January, it's winter. When it hits June, it's summer. Like they don't do it like we do. And I had no idea. So I loved that it creates a space for them to share those kinds of things too. But yeah, okay. I could keep talking and I'm not going to, because Wanda needs to share. So.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'm going to transition us to high school. And when we get to high school, in science classes, the one thing about middle school and elementary, they kind of touch on all the sciences from kindergarten to 8th grade. Then once they hit the 9th grade, they start specializing. So you're going to take a biology class where you're just going to focus on life science, or chemistry class, or physics class. And so they have some prior knowledge to the vocabulary and the content. But we really do like to focus on that academic vocabulary. And sometimes when we talk about thinking like a scientist, scientists draw data charts and they graph things and they use mathematics to solve problems. Especially in chemistry and physics, you're going to use a lot of mathematics. You're going to have to read scientific journals, and you're going to have to actually put some sort of visual representation or determine your percent error as to why you made a mistake in this particular example. And so we are really focusing at the high school level that you got to start thinking like a scientist. And when you get to college, these are what scientists do. And so you can progress to the next slide. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about two things: writing to build background knowledge and writing to summarize content. And so when we think about background knowledge, we already know that once they hit the 9th grade, they have touched on cells, they've touched on the atom, they've touched on forces and motion, a lot of those concepts. And so you want to allow them to make those connections to that past learning, and that helps build their confidence, especially when they're sitting in a 9th grade biology class, never having done that before. And so making sure that they can tap into what they already know and show them that it's not going to be as bad as you think. You already know some of these things, and we're going to try to tap into that using a strategy that I have on the next slide. In our particular high school, we have a very large percentage of ML students. And so we have over 400, which would be about 40% of our population doesn't speak English as a first language. And so a lot of visuals have to be provided because there's not a translation for atom or some of the content vocabulary they're going to learn in a science class. So this particular strategy is called hanging hashtags. And we're going to help build the students' background knowledge through writing when we introduce a new topic. So in this next slide, this is a chemistry class. I'm sorry, this is a biology class. The next example is chemistry. This is biology. So you just put images up all around the room, and you ask the students to write, what do they see? What do they think? And then write a hashtag. And you just hang those up. And that's how you introduce that particular concept. And this is cells. So different types of cells, plant, animal. There's an onion cell slide here. But they should already have some prior knowledge here. So in this example, it says, I see different colored cells. So they already knew that this was a cell. The other one says, I see different colored dots on each image. So there may be a little bit of a gap in knowledge with that student, but you can sort these out and say, okay, this group, I probably could do something different. This group, we may need a little bit more pre-work because we don't know that we're beyond dots at this point. And so go to the next slide. And this is the chemistry. If I was getting ready to introduce a unit on the atom, the very first thing that I'm going to talk about is, where did it evolve from? How did it change? How did we get from just a circle to a circle with rings around it? What did that progression look like? And so this student said, I see circles, plus and minus signs, and rings. I think those look like atoms, and my hashtags are hashtag circles, hashtag atoms. And so this person already knows, okay, we're probably going to start talking about atoms. This other one says, I see circles, small circles, plus signs. I think atoms. And so my hashtag is hashtag weird and hashtag what is that? So it's a little cool, fun way to kind of build that background knowledge. This strategy is actually a strategy for your LEP 1s and 2s who are sitting in that classroom who do not speak a whole lot of English, but it works for all students, and especially when you get that hashtag in there. So the next part of my presentation is talking about summarizing and synthesizing. So not only, after you've done the lesson, a big part of science is summarizing, synthesizing, analyzing, and evaluating. I always told my students, you signed up to take this class as a chemistry teacher, not to become a chemist, but so that I can teach you how to think. Because that is a skill you're going to use in every class that you go to. And so usually chemistry is going to be a sophomore, junior course where students are getting ready to take an end of course in English 2, where they have to write a constructed response. They're getting ready to take the ACT or the SAT, where there's a writing component there. They're also probably going to take an AP class, or they could move on to an AP chemistry class. And so I want my students to be able to summarize and put all the information that we have done for the day or the unit together. And so we can go to that next slide. Here is what we call a constructed response. So a constructed response, you're going to see it in math, English, and now you see it in science. So if you splashed about 250 milliliters of diluted sulfuric acid over a large area of your clothing, what should you do and why? And I'm looking for a response. I want the students to know that if you have this safety issue happening, you got to know how to communicate effectively. First of all, this happened. And you got to know, well, what do I need to do? You can't just sit there with your clothes on. And then if you need extra support, especially again for your ML students, you're going to add what we call a sentence frame. And that sentence frame is going to say, if diluted sulfuric acid spilled on my clothing, I would do because. So this student here wrote, it would burn your clothes and go onto your skin. So you would need to get soap and water to wash it off, the rest. So there's a misconception here. And I would know, okay, based on how this student wrote this response, I need to do a little bit more teaching, because soap and water is not going to get sulfuric acid out of your clothes. You got to do something else. And so I would have to go back and reteach. And this would be like a ticket out the door. And so the next day I would come in and say, all right, let's talk about acids and when things spill on your clothes versus water or versus colored substance that we don't know what it is. I would need to go back and revisit that concept. Next slide. This last constructed response is a little bit more like a test prep question that they would see on those state tests. This is about biology. Natural selection is an evolutionary mechanism. And basically, they're going to look at the data and they're going to have to define, based on the data, what is adaptation and what is its relationship with natural selection. So we're trying to look at and analyze this to see if they can determine, based on the data chart, and again, this is reading and writing, how can I make that correlation between natural selection and adaptation? And so if you go to the next slide, if I had to add a little bit more support in, because this is a longer question, I would add a picture. So I'm not seeing the next slide. There we go. I would add a picture, an illustration to go with it, and I would also add a sentence frame to help students get started with answering this question. It's a little bit more complicated of a question. And so my two examples are all about how do we use that academic vocabulary and get students to put that into words instead of me just making them take notes all the time. I need to see if they can make sense of, all right, what does all this mean? And it's not just writing a formal lab report, which that is a big, huge piece in the high school setting of writing out a formal lab report. But these little formative assessments that you do on a day-to-day can include that writing. And so my last part for you, I'm going to throw some writing at you. And this is a summarizing strategy where you're going to have to connect writing in science to what you already know. You're going to have to figure out, well, what did we do to extend your thinking and challenge you? And so I'm going to put a link in the chat to a Jamboard. And you'll just click on that link. And whenever you're ready, Anna, you can pull up that Jamboard. And we're going to look at frame number 1. So how is this presentation connected to what you already know about writing in science? You've seen the claim, evidence, reasoning, strategy, and you've seen the hanging hashtags and the constructed response. So you're just going to grab a sticky note and just start typing.
For those of you that have not used Jamboard, the sticky notes are on the left-hand side. You'll see the pen and then an erase and then a select and then a sticky note.
So one of the biggest things that I hear from the high school teachers is that I'm not a reading teacher. I'm not a writing teacher. I don't know how to do these things. But I try to find little strategies that can transfer quickly and that are easy for teachers to use in their own classroom that they can do right now. That doesn't say, oh, you're a reading teacher, oh, you're a writing teacher. It feels like just a normal everyday strategy that you would do with any kid. So we can see our responses here to this question. We're connecting. All right, so let's go to the second frame and let's see what new ideas did you get that extended or broadened your thinking about writing in science. So what extended or broadened your thinking about writing in science? Oh, this is great. It's not just about formal lab report writing. It's something that can be done every day. You all are writing right now. And so lastly, let's go to our challenge. So what challenges or questions are still in your mind about writing in science? Oh, these are great questions. I'd love to address this one about how do we get more science teachers to believe that they are reading/writing teachers just as much as an ELA teacher. And this is coming from someone who did not go through a traditional education program. I decided to be a teacher after I had the degree. And one class that I had to take in my alternative certification program was reading and writing in the content areas. And that's when it clicked for me that, oh, I I can do this as a science teacher. I can get kids to read, I can get them to write. And I don't know, for those of you who are in the traditional education programs, if there is a secondary class that undergraduates take called reading and writing in the content areas, and that's a requirement. And that someone who is not a literacy person is teaching it. And so that is wonderful if it is happening. I know that I took some College of Ed classes, and that was not one of mine when I was in my program. And so, I don't know if that's a start, but someone who is a science teacher teaching reading and writing in science, or someone who is a math teacher teaching it, because those are the people that do it every day and can make that connection quickly as to how to get it to happen in your classrooms.
Wanda, I really love that you brought that up because I think that's something that people that do critical disciplinary literacy, they're really focused on this idea of, are we coming in from an ELA perspective and we're using ELA and literacy language, versus are we having these conversations with mathematicians, with scientists of, well, what does literacy look like there? What is the end goal in a science class, in a biology class, and what are the processes that are occurring, versus, okay, well, let's just make this literacy because it's literacy. It's looking at things from that lens with people in the discipline versus coming in as the experts. And Dr. Hansfield actually brought that up as well. This is very slowly being put into elementary programs, but it's not there yet. It is more of secondary only.
Yeah.
Well, and what happened when they were developing the standards was it was a much, much longer title. It was ELA/literacy in the content areas and something else. And so because the title was so long, they just eliminated the rest of it and just started calling it ELA. So it's like it's always been there for the content area teachers to be involved with, but because it was just ELA, slash with ELA, it didn't get much attention.
One of the things that I'm seeing as a former bilingual elementary teacher and as a bilingual teacher educator is an increased emphasis on interdisciplinary biliteracy units. There seems to be a huge focus on that, which I think is a really productive turn. I'm really excited about that. And to be able to do, that's one of the reasons I'm sitting here right now, because I'm trying to increase my own knowledge in that regard. So yeah, for what it's worth.
I'm excited that this webinar is recorded, because we can put it out on the website and refer other people to it from our classes. If we're having the CARW courses, we can say that this is an assignment. Go and listen to this, because it was exceptional that these things are happening in science. I just am floored that such good things are happening in a content area.
Dr. Hansfeld, what state are you in again?
Please call me Lara. I am in Illinois. So.
Okay, because
Welcome.
when your comment had about reading endorsement. So I just moved from South Carolina. I live in North Carolina now, but South Carolina, they do require all elementary ed as well as all secondary education people take a content area reading course. I mean, it's content area, so depending on who's teaching it and what have you is what you get. But
right.
Your comment, I was like, oh, so not everybody does have that next step in Illinois.
No, now anyone who's getting we have a dedicated middle level program as well as secondary, and they all do. But in our elementary and early childhood, it's only those getting a reading endorsement.
Wow.
Which I think is a real shame.
Yeah.
I mean, they take their methods classes, but in terms of a disciplinary literacy kind of thing, yeah.
Well, I would think that